Next type of asexual reproduction is spore formation. Spores are thin-walled, single-celled propagules, and they are basically found in organisms belonging to Monera, Protista, algae, and fungi. Spore formation is of many types. There are many different types of spores that are formed. We'll be discussing a few of them just to understand how they facilitate asexual reproduction in these organisms. So, one type of spores are the zoospores. The zoospores are the motile spores which are formed in aquatic individuals. The organisms that live in water, they form the zoospores. One example is the Chlamydomonas. Chlamydomonas forms zoospores in specialized structures called as the zoosporangium. These zoospores, they are single-celled and they are motile. They swim with the help of their flagella and they move in the water and they give rise to a new individual. The next kind of spores are the conidia. Conidia are the spores which are non-motile in nature. They are again thin-walled. So let us write the example here, Chlamydomonas. The second type are the conidia. They are formed in the penicillium fungi. You all must be aware of the penicillium fungi, that this was the first antibiotics. It was discovered from this fungi by Alexander Fleming. Must have read about it in your previous chapters or previous classes. So conidia, now how they help in dispersal? The conidia, they are formed on specialized hyphae which are known as the conidiophores. So these conidiophores, they give rise to the conidia. In certain species, these conidia are formed in chains, and in some other, it can be formed terminal also and single also. Fine. So these are the specialized hyphae called as conidiophores. So what happens that these conidia, the new ones keep forming from here and the older ones, they are eliminated or they kind of drop off from the tip and they give rise to a new organism. The third type of spores that are formed are the chlamydospores. The chlamydospores can be seen in organisms such as Rhizopus, and these chlamydospores are usually formed in the unfavorable conditions. They are formed directly on the hyphae and they are thick-walled. Now these spores also, the chlamydospores also, they can be intercalary or they can be terminal in some cases. So the next type is the chlamydospores. Another type of spores that are formed in certain fungi are the oidea. These spores are thin-walled and again non-motile, and they are nothing but they are the fragments of the specialized hyphae. These fragments, when they fall on a substratum, they give rise to the new individual. And these oidea, they are formed in conditions when there is an excess of water, salt or sugar. And example is again Rhizopus also makes oidea and also agaricus or mushrooms. Another type of spores are the sporangiospores. Sporangiospores can be seen in Rhizopus on specialized hyphae called as the sporangiophores. So if you can see here, so this kind of hyphal structures, and they have a structure called as sporangium on them, and inside the sporangium, these spores are formed. The sporangiospores are formed. When this sporangium, it ruptures, it releases these sporangiospores into the environment. So these kind of spores can also be seen in Rhizopus. So this was the another type of asexual mode of reproduction by spore formation. Next, we come to asexual reproduction in plants. Now, asexual reproduction in plants is called as vegetative propagation. Vegetative propagation is a process of multiplication in which a part or portion of the plant body, it acts as a propagule and helps in vegetatively increasing or multiplying the number of plants. Vegetative propagation can be natural as well as artificial, since it is beneficial to the farmers as well as the agriculturalists. How is it beneficial? One, it accelerates the rate of multiplication. The multiplication of plants is faster when we are following the vegetative mode of reproduction as compared to the sexual modes of reproduction. Secondly, the good characters of the parents can be maintained in the new plants. If the variety, there is a plant variety which has a high yield, is disease resistant, then all these qualities can be maintained when we grow plants or propagate plants by the method of vegetative propagation. So let us discuss what are the various methods by which vegetative propagation takes place in plants. As we discussed earlier, right now, that vegetative propagation is a process in which in which a plant part, a fragment or a portion of the plant part, it acts as a propagule. Now this portion can be either the part from root of the plant, it can be either from the stem, or it can be from the leaves. Now, depending upon which part of the plant acts as a propagule, different plants have different modes of vegetative propagation. For the roots, we can take the example of Delbergia or Shisham plant. In this, the roots, they develop certain adventitious buds, and then these adventitious buds, they give rise to a new plant. This kind of vegetative propagation also seen in sweet potato. This is another example. In this, what happens? These are the root tubers. So adventitious buds on these root tubers, they can be either cut from the plant and regrown to give rise to a new plant, or the whole of the sweet potato, it acts as a new plant. Then certain stems also, they undergo vegetative propagation. These can be divided into three types. One are the aerial stems that undergo vegetative propagation, the subaerial stems, and the underground stems. Let us take these examples one by one. You all must have seen the sugarcane plant. What does it look like? A sugarcane plant looks something like this, and it has got various nodes and internodes. Okay, so it has got the long leaves here, and so it is something like this. So any one of its portion which has a node with a bud, when it is cut off from the main plant and sown in the soil, it gives rise to a new plant. Now, examples of the subaerial plants which can undergo vegetative propagation. Again, you all must have seen the grass plant. The grass plant is one such example which propagates vegetatively. How does that happen? These plants are called as runners, and they creep on the ground. So, At one point where the grass is growing, suppose this is the soil and this is a grass plant, at this point it develops a stem. This stem grows horizontally over a period, and then at one of its nodes, wherever soil conditions are favorable, it gives rise to another plant. Now, this portion can be 1 internode long, 2 internode longs, or more than that, depending upon the place where these grass plants or the runners are growing. Similar to runners, there are one more example, which are the offsets. Offsets are also plants which grow through vegetative propagation. The very common example of offset is Eichhornia or the water hyacinth. The water hyacinth or the Eichhornia is also called as the terror of Bengal. Now, why is it called so? Let us try to understand. Now, these offsets or the water hyacinth, since they are aquatic plants, they have thick leaves. They look something like this, and they grow on the surface of the water, having leaves on the outer surface and the bulbous roots inside the water. So both the leaves and the roots, they have parenchyma in them, so that it facilitates the floating of this plant. At this point, these plants, they grow a stem which grows on the surface of water, and at the end of one internode, rather at this next node, it gives rise to the leaves at the top and roots at the bottom. So this is the water. Now, the stem also is bulbous and soft in nature. So eventually at times this stem, it disintegrates or it rots and dissolves or disappears, and these water hyacinth can be seen floating individually on the water surfaces. Now, why are they called terror of Bengal? They are called so because they have the ability to grow at a very fast rate. As a result, so happens that they cover the whole of the water surface and they consume all the oxygen in that particular water body and kill the natural vegetation and the fish that are living in that water body. Hence, they are termed as the terror of Bengal. So now let us discuss how the underground stem, they help in vegetative propagation. You must have all seen the potato. These are the tubers, and a potato has eyes or the nodes on its surface. Each node has the ability to give rise to a new plant. So if we cut a portion of this potato containing the node or the eye and we grow it in the soil, it can give rise to a new plant. Similarly, the underground stem, like the rhizome, example is ginger. They are structures like this, growing horizontally in the soil, and they have circular nodes. And in these nodes, there are certain buds, and each bud has the ability to give rise to a new plant. Similarly, are examples like bulbs or the onion, which is one of the example of a bulb. These bulbs also, they have condensed shoots at their base, and this shoot has the ability to give rise to a new plant. And the corms, such as colocasia, they also are the underground stem. Colocasia is the example. So these are also the underground stem which have the ability to propagate vegetatively. After the natural mode of vegetative propagation, let's move over to the artificial modes of vegetative propagation. Okay, before that, let's move over to the leaves. The leaves also can act as a source of vegetative propagation. There are leaves like that of bryophyllum or patharchat. You must have seen these leaves are thick and they are green in color. They look something like this, and at their notches, they develop adventitious buds which give rise to a new plant. Now when this leaf, it falls from the main plant body into the soil, all these plants, they grow to give rise to new individual plants. Or sometimes it so happens that when these plantlets which grow in the notches of these leaves, when they grow in size, they themselves fall down and give rise to a new plant. So these were the modes of natural vegetative propagation. Now let us see what are the various modes of artificial vegetative propagation that the agriculturalists or the farmers, they have developed for improvement of the crops. Artificial modes of vegetative propagation can be of many types. We'll be discussing a few here. So artificial vegetative propagation. We'll be discussing three types. One is cutting. Second, we'll be discussing about layering. And third, we'll be discussing grafting. Now, how are these methods actually performed? Now, you must have seen that there are certain plants like the rose plant. They are usually grown by the cuttings of these plants rather than through the sexual modes of reproduction by formation of seeds, because it is a faster method. So what happens in a rose plant? That 20 to 30 centimeter stem is cut and an oblique cut is given on the stem to ensure that there is a maximum exposure of the tissue. One of its side, one of the portion of the stem is dipped in the root inducing hormones or the auxins. These auxins, they stimulate the root formation in that one of the parts of the cuttings from the plant, and then they are sown in the soil. And these cuttings then later give rise to a new plant, forming roots at the base and stem and leaves at the top. So this is how cutting is performed. The second method is that of layering. Layering can be of two types. One, the layering is done at the soil using the basal branch of a plant. Another type of layering is done in the air, and basically that is done in the larger trees. So what happens in layering? That, for example, we have usually done in jasmine plants. So we have a plant growing we take one of the basal branch of the plant and we remove all the leaves from this branch. We pull the branch under the soil and cover the branch with a lot of soil. After a period of time, it is seen that the roots develop on the lower portion, and here the stem formation takes place. Now, this part of the branch is cut off and a new plant is transplanted or taken to some other place, and it acts as a new individual plant. Before the branch is covered in the soil, a small cut or incision is made on the branch so that the root formation can be easily done, and the plants, the branch is able to come in contact with the soil more easily. Another type of layering is this is a simple kind of layering. The another kind of layering is the air layering. In air layering, what they do, larger trees which have good fruit variety, they for increasing their number, what they do, they take one of the healthy branch of the tree, they remove the bark from that branch, they covered that portion from where the bark has been removed, they covered that portion with mud and a little sawdust, some cow dung, and some auxins. And then they cover that portion with this material along with covering it with the polythene and tying it up. After some time, in that portion, that part of the branch, certain roots develop, and then that branch is cut off from the main tree and grown at another place or transplanted somewhere else. So air layering also is a kind of artificial vegetative propagation. The third kind that we'll be discussing here is grafting. Grafting is a method wherein the two plants, their good qualities are mixed together. So basically the plants are chosen in such a way that one of the plant has a stronger shoot system and another plant has a stronger root system. That means that if suppose there is a plant which has got a high yielding variety and it yields a lot of fruits or vegetables. So the shoot from that plant is taken and a root of another plant which is probably disease resistant, is able to thrive in different environmental conditions, that is taken. And both their qualities are combined by grafting. So the shoot part which is taken is known as the scion, and usually a cut is made into it. So we make a kind of a wedge cut on the scion, which is the graft, a part of the branch or the shoot from one of the plants. Then this is inserted into another part of the plant which has a stronger root system. Okay, this is called as the shaft. Both of them, they are joined and then they are tied with a rope or a thread together for a period of time. Slowly, both these plants, they kind of combine with each other and they form a single plant. So this is how the qualities of the two plants, they can be combined together. So we have covered vegetative propagation also. So a quick recap of the various methods of asexual modes of reproduction that we did today were: 1. We started off with fission. We discussed about 3 types of fission, that is binary fission, multiple fission and plasmotomy. Then second method that we took up was budding. In budding, we did exogenous buds. We discussed what were exogenous buds and what are endogenous buds. In fragmentation, we took 2 examples, one of Taenia or the tapeworm and second of algae Spirogyra. Third was spore formation. We saw how different types of spores, they are used in dispersal as well as formation of a new plant or a new organism. Then the last part that we discussed was vegetative propagation. We saw how natural vegetative propagation takes place in plant, which ensures that the multiplication of plants take place at a faster rate and good qualities of the parents are kind of preserved from generation to generation. And we also discussed the artificial vegetative propagation, which is done by the agriculturists artificially, by the farmers artificially, to give rise to new plants which have better qualities. So we discussed about cutting, which takes place in rose plant, layering, which is seen in plants such as jasmine or in the trees like guava, mango, apple, citrus and so on. And we discussed about grafting again, which is possible in trees like the mango, guava and apples, citrus and so on. So in the next part of the video, we will be discussing about the sexual modes of reproduction. We will be discussing various terms which will be helpful to you in understanding the concepts which come up in the next chapter, that is sexual reproduction in plants and sexual reproduction in human beings, followed by the fourth chapter, which is the reproductive health. So we'll be discussing in the next chapter, in the next series of this video. Thank you.